Good afternoon. How are you? Well, there are two good things about today. One is I'm on the trail, and the other is that the temperature is 78 degrees, the sun is out, and there's no wind to speak of. So that's the Thomas Jefferson weather report for today. Things are pretty good. Holly and I continue to make adjustments to her medical plan with the brilliance of Johns Hopkins double lung transplant team. And so we're so grateful for the skills they have, and we're very grateful for you guys writing us and talking to us and wishing us well and saying prayers. Thank you very much. I'm sure it all makes a difference. It certainly does to our attitude. And attitude is a lot after you've defined the medical problem. So, what kind of problems do we have? I'm going to go through a couple of things. I don't know if they'll be brief or long because I've just been thinking about them. One is an environmental concern. And it is that the waters of the world have grown so warm, they've compromised the oceans. The oceans have been warmed. And so half the world's reefs are being bleached. Countries, 53 countries, have been affected by the warmth and the bleaching. And so what we have is a world that is putting at risk the oceans, how they operate, and the life that we depend on seriatim through the phases of access from animals to us. And so what we have is a world that suffers heat stress. Now, what does that have to do with Trump? Well, I think Trump is like that bleaching agent, and his effect is on our systems of law and of trust and of virtue. And he's a very negative, destroying source. And just as the bleaching of the waters is causing our oceans to risk starvation, he puts us at risk of starvation. That is, as to the law and as to virtue. And I suppose you could say the after effect or side effect or central effect of Trump is moral stress, no question about it. He has no morality. He is a tempter. He is an exploiter. He is a predator. So, what is the trial then? The trial is, to my way of thinking, the antidote to the bleaching agent that is Trump. And it is showing us a couple of things that are critical. One is he's sitting in that courtroom. He is as reduced in his humanity as he can be. He doesn't have that spark that remains with a person who is authentic, I think is the best way to put it. I've had friends in public life be asked, why do you think people say you don't have charisma? One public official I've got a lot of respect for. And then he argued that I do have charisma. It's something that you can argue for. You either have it or you don't. In Trump's case, what you have is a specimen of intensely compressed, like a diamond, except of deceit and death and hurt and failure and disappointment. So we have several things about a trial that maybe have been explained, but I may have a different viewpoint of some of these things. So let's try the first trial that I was ever at as a prosecutor. I was sworn in the day this trial began, and it was a securities fraud case. And I was not responsible to try the case. I was there to assist a more senior, very capable, outstanding lawyer who knew the securities code inside out in his case And I had the opportunity to walk into the courtroom after all this preparation and to be second in the case. Now, that meant, I did handle witnesses and so forth, but I was there, I think, in retrospect, so that I could help write the brief if we got, as we expected, convictions, which we did. But in the securities fraud case, it was interesting. I was in the men's room and I heard this bottle flap around. And then I heard somebody mumbling, talking. And it turned out he was one of the defendants in the case. I didn't say anything to him. I didn't hear anything pertinent. But then we went to the courtroom and I saw him sitting with defense counsel. And as the prosecutor that I was assisting was giving his opening, this man was making faces for the jury like, "Oh, how could you say so? What do you mean?" And it looked very lame to me. Like I was surprised by it, but I didn't think it worked. And today, Trump apparently turned his hefty body toward a juror or jurors and said something that, as far as I can tell, hasn't been revealed to us. But having contact with a juror is not only unethical and subject for contempt, it's a crime. And I was involved in investigations of such things. Now, on one level, this doesn't surprise us. That's Trump. On another level, this is that kind of trial. And people are anesthetized to the reality of a trial rather. Talking about what I'd rather think about than this, I suppose. The reality of a trial is it's a messy piece of business. And Trump contributed to that today. And he's still posturing himself as the victim when he's the one who put himself exactly where he's sitting now. So, how does Trump and this case get to a point where it's, quote, tried? Well, first we pick the jury, and I'm not sure it's been explained the way I've understood it and practiced it. In a case that's had media coverage, and this one certainly has, there's no place, maybe on earth, that you could try this case and there'd be nobody who heard anything about it. I suppose it's possible, but... And so you accept the fact that a person living in society has heard about certainly Trump and his troubles and knows something of the story in a layman's kind of way. And so the test isn't that you have no recognition of what's going on. It is that you don't know everything. And the question is, can you put aside whatever feelings you have about the case or thoughts you have about the case and limit your judgment to what comes forward in the courtroom. Now, some don't want to be on the jury, so they'll say anything to get off. I love them, I hate them, whatever. Others will want to do their duty and mean what they say. And then, there'll be the peculiar instances, like Trump reaching across in however subtle a way to communicate, seemingly, with the juror. Now, when choosing the jury, we look at their background and things like that. And most people who've tried cases have a whole host of tests by which they decide this juror would be good for us, that one would be bad for us, And Trump thinks he knows who he wants. A white male from Staten Island who wears his red cap to work every day and hasn't thought a great deal except to say, I know him for Trump. Now that person is probably going to get screened out. But when we talk about a possible hung jury, we're talking about a person who's going to ignore the law and vote acquittal for Trump. Is it a possibility? Absolutely. And then when we have the trial, it's very interesting. Years ago, when I had my first solo trial, when Rudy Giuliani was not yet crazy, but he'd been there a few years before me, and that made a big difference in terms of experience. And he asked me if I wanted to know how he tried a case. And I said, sure. And the day I was sworn in, by the way, he cross-examined a congressman, and he was so powerful in his examination that the congressman entered a guilty plea at the trial, interrupting the trial. So there's no question Rudy had talent, and he seemed to care about other assistants to help him as he proposed to help me. And you may use this as a guide to see how the opening goes. So what he'd say was, now John, when you start the case, you don't stand up there and say, I'm John Flannery and I represent the U.S. Attorney and da-da-da. Don't do that. He said, this is your first opportunity to talk to the jury, and you want to tell them 3 times what this case is about. And the first time is when you get up to talk. There sit 75 people all involved in abusing children, moving drugs, and blowing up train stations. We're going to ask you to convict them to pay for their crimes. Then you say, my name is John Flannery. I'm glad to represent the U.S. government, particularly against such a heinous crime. First time you mention. Then you say, let me tell you what this case is about. And you tell them the story. Imagine how Trump will be at this phase of the opening. Hitting the table, making faces, being as childish as he can. Great pretense at power and authority, but in truth a coward through and through. A man without rightness or resolve to do what is right. The third part, after you tell the story, is, and you may well ask, how I'm going to prove this case to you. Well, let me tell you, we're going to ask you to pay careful attention because we've got a lot of documents and a lot of exhibits for you to look at. But here's what you'll find. They tell the story. Live witnesses with documents that shore up their credibility. And so you'll hear from the former lawyer for Trump, who aided and abetted and conspired to do the bad deeds that are the subjects of this indictment. Then you elaborate upon that. And if there are special issues, say the government does get in the phone call that Michael Cohen received when he was going to talk to the U.S. Senate on the Hill. He was told by Bob Costello, a former AUSA from the Southern District who represented Rudy Giuliani and some other people in this mess that we're still observing, and told him, remember, you have friends upstairs. Now the court may not let that in, but the plain point is, if you toe the line, say what helps us, you'll help yourself. Now in the days ahead, we're going to go through these passages and more, and we're going to hear commentators that have never seen a whole trial, and certainly not one as substantial as this, say they never saw anything like this before, because they haven't. But there are substantial trials all through history that go through these processes. And so there'll be good days and bad days for the government. In the end, I believe they have more than sufficient evidence and sufficient legal theories to carry the day. So that's my short review of the trial today. I hope you're well. It's good to be out. It's so pleasant. And hopefully I'll get out tomorrow to talk to you. In the meantime, I say goodbye to you from my cathedral of trees. All the best. Bye-bye.